Checks and balances is a system that's built into the Constitution, or comes from the Constitution, that prevents one part of our government, our federal government, from being too powerful. So you'll hear this from time to time if you read or watch television or the news. It's an important concept that really is quite unique to the United States. So if you look on the screen now, you can see that just a reminder of our three federal branches of government. Right? Another way of looking at it is maybe this way. We've got the legislative branch, which makes the laws, so that's Congress. The executive branch of the government, the president. And the president makes sure that all the laws are carried out. And the judicial branch would decide whether or not laws fit within the Constitution. So another way of thinking of this is, so Congress might make a law that says that you may not have automatic handguns. Well, it would be up to the president to make sure that that law is followed. If there were people who had automatic handguns in the United States, the president or the president's agents, whether FBI or Secret Service or the Customs Department, whatever federal agents there are, most likely the FBI, would make sure that people don't have these automatic handguns. And if they did, they would be arrested. Now, that law probably would be on the desk of the Supreme Court justices pretty quickly. So they would look at this law passed by Congress that says that handguns that are automatic are outlawed, and they would look at the Constitution and decide whether or not that law would fit within the Second Amendment of the Constitution, and chances are most likely it would not, and that law would be declared unconstitutional. But all three of these branches of government work together, and in this case, the judicial branch had the power to stop the legislative and the executive branch. So we call that a check. Before we move on, one of the most amazing things about American government is really not the Bill of Rights, which is amazing, not our amendments, but really this idea that was unique back in the 1700s and is still rather unique today, that we have three equal and distinct branches of government. In many cases around the world, you might have a separate judicial branch, but the executive is a part of the legislative, a creature of the legislature. So, for example, in Britain, they have a parliament, but they also have a prime minister who basically is from parliament. In Australia and Canada, same thing. It's the United States that really came up with this idea of having a separate and unique executive and a different branch with the same powers. So we have three separate and equal branches of government. But this video is more about what happens when one branch gets a little bit out of control, maybe too much power. Is it possible for the other two branches to step in and stop them? So it's best maybe to think of a hockey match. So you're playing hockey and you're skating along. You think you've got a clear shot at the goal. You're skating along thinking you're going to dominate, and then suddenly, bam, you're smashed up against the glass. All right, we call this move in hockey a check. All right, so you're going to score, you think you're going to dominate, and then suddenly smashed and stopped. We call it a check. Okay? Same thing in chess. Let's say you're playing chess, you're playing offense, you're going after your opponent, and suddenly your opponent has made a move that forces you to go from offense to defense. In other words, you've been checked. In fact, your opponent will say to you, check, means stop. And if it's, the end of the game and you can't move, it'll be checkmate. So when we think about this idea that's in the Constitution called checks and balances, really think of it as the check is a way to stop another branch of government from going too far or abusing power. And balance means that everyone's equal. Congress is no more powerful than the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is no more powerful than the president. They all have their own powers that, when used, can stop the other branches from going too far. So if it helps to think about hockey or chess, either way, think of a A check is a stop. And a balance means they're all equal and that no one branch, whether the president or Congress or the Supreme Court, is too powerful. Now on this next slide, after I go through it quickly, you might want to pause and study it a little bit more because it's color-coded and it does show you really the powers of each branch and how they can influence or check the other branches. So we'll start with the pink or the orangish pink, the legislative branch, so Congress. So Congress has the power to override presidential vetoes, control the money, that's what we call appropriations. They ratify treaties. Remember, the Senate is in charge of ratifying treaties. So whereas the president might make a treaty with France, if the Senate doesn't ratify it, it's a dead treaty. Also, the president may go and push for war, but it's up to the Congress to actually declare the war. So both houses of Congress has to declare a war for it to be an actual war. The president might want to appoint someone to a position, whether the Supreme Court or as an ambassador, but if the Senate says no, then that appointment doesn't take place. And of course, the legislative branch can impeach, accuse, and remove the president from office if the president goes way too far. All right? So the legislative branch going over to the judicial branch, they have powers to check the judicial branch. They can refuse judicial appointments. So that's one way they can kind of control who's on the Supreme Court. The Senate would do that. And they have the authority to impeach judges. So if a judge or justice goes too far, they can be impeached and removed from office. Congress has the power to create lower courts. So if there is 10 lower courts, Congress has the power to create 10 more or 94 more. They are in charge of that. And they can propose constitutional amendments. So when we said earlier that in that handgun law, if, for example, Congress had passed it and now the Supreme Court has struck it down, Congress could propose an amendment that said now that while we might be able to have a shotgun, a new amendment says no handguns in the United States. Now, I'm not sure that would ever pass, but Congress, in theory, could do that. So looking at this chart, you can see the power of Congress over the other two. Now, I get it. Looking at this chart and having me explain it to you is kind of like explaining the rules for baseball or some other sport. It's probably best that you just go play it and you learn it as you go, or you watch it enough times on TV and you get it. But it's helpful to see it written in chart form. The executive branch, how can the president stop the other branches? Well, the president is the commander-in-chief. He can veto bills. So Congress can pass a bill. The president has the power to veto that. Of course, the veto can be overridden by 2/3 of the Congress, but that's often hard to get. So if the president doesn't like a bill and he vetoes it or she vetoes it, it most likely will be dead. The president has the power to recommend legislation, go on television, talk about it. He probably can find a member of Congress that'd be willing to sponsor a bill for him or her. It's quite common. And in certain cases, the president can call a special session of Congress. So if Congress goes home to all their districts across the country, the president has the power to bring them back. And that can be a powerful tool for them to get to work. But the president also has some power over the judicial branch. The president appoints all the federal judges, so that's a big power to have over them. Most likely, presidents will pick people who tend to think the way the president does. It's the way that presidents kind of cement their legacy. It makes sure that people on the courts think like the president long after the president is no longer in that job. And an absolute power that the president has is that he or she can grant pardons or reprieves. So if the courts were to put people in jail and the president thinks that the court is going too far, the president can get them out of jail and they're never to be in jail again for that crime. And that's an absolute power of the president, and it's a really big superpower that the president has. So you can see the powers of the executive branch, the president, it's in blue. And finally, the judicial branch, so the Supreme Court. They may rule that a presidential act is unconstitutional. So if the president does something like maybe bans people from coming into the United States or does something with like border enforcement, and the Supreme Court thinks that the president's gone too far, The Supreme Court might declare that unconstitutional if he tries to do or she tries to do something beyond their power. Also, these judges are put on there for life. So these Supreme Court justices and all the federal judges are there for 20, 30, maybe even 40 years, long after presidents come and go. So this is really a way that the courts can kind of outlast the president. And of course, the big power that the judicial branch has, the Supreme Court has, is they may declare laws unconstitutional, which is a huge superpower against the legislative branch. So, I mean, there are a lot of powers for each of these branches. I guess a superpower for each, think of what are the most powerful weapons they have. Well, the president's pardon is a big one, and the president's veto is a big one. Of course, the judicial branch, their ability to strike down a law, and that's the end of it, declaring a law unconstitutional, is a pretty big superpower. And of course, the Congress, just the fact they make the laws, but the whole Senate approving appointments and treaties, Congress declaring war, they have several superpowers, seeing as how they're a huge number of people, 535 people make up Congress. But you can see that each branch has some say and ability to check or to stop another branch of government, and no branch of our government is bigger or more powerful than the next. So checks and balances really is all about keeping each branch equal, and each branch has some power over the other. And it really is, this three-branch system really is a unique, amazing American invention that has worked. And it's been tested, but for the most part, it's worked great. And hopefully now, as you see our government interact with each other, each branch interact with each other on the federal level and somewhat on the state and local level, you'll see checks and balances in action.